constitutionally republican model for his country. As France had shown, this libertarian republic, so equality, liberty, fraternity, as being the three maxims of the saintly state, had frankly no room for a competing god. And anti-clericalism rooted itself from 1849, when the Italian statesman Cavour, following the example of Napoleon, decided to grab the old papal states. The Italians didn't execute their priests as the French had guillotined their own, because the opposition of the new republic to the Vatican was less violent than Voltaire's or Robespierre's. After all, the humanistic and egalitarian values of the Republic were not so far removed from those of St. Francis in support of the poor and the weak. And then, if Assisi was only a few valleys away, so was the Vatican itself. So France led the way in Europe to what we call the Constitutional Republic. Those who have grown up under its wing have been deeply influenced by the ideals of Voltaire and of Rousseau. And their values generally express this quasi-divinization of the state. And a form of humanism, tells us Voltaire, which hardly admits of competition from the church for men's minds. The redistribution of wealth throughout the state to achieve egalitarianism, and carried out by a state with no human face, because there is no monarch. The sanctity of citizen service to the interests of the state on behalf of the community, which takes precedence over the interests of any individual citizen. This communitarianism, demonstrated in the street by the citizen and by his family, which is the only place where a republic acknowledges their existence as individuals with a minority interest, because it is the collective that comes first. The sacrosanct principle of meritocracy, which is the antithesis of aristocracy, in the choice of those who govern, with the widespread rejection of birthright or of individual power of privilege, which has not been assigned to citizens by democratic election. This aggressive defense of human rights, but not necessarily of human duties, were, frankly, an impersonal state is expected to assume responsibility rather than an individual. And the destruction of class differences by breaking down class barriers between citizens, all of whom are deemed to be free and equal at birth, but which monarchists consider to be untrue. And finally, Romanism, my mother's Catholicism. That of an Italian child shortly before the war, in 1939-45, and with a profile that I call Romanist. She spent her youth under the papacy of Pius XI, very characteristic of traditional dogmatism and of a powerful, nurturing mother church. Although Roman Catholicism gives immense weight to the other world, Mother Church nonetheless imposed her temporal power on the feudal and absolute monarchies of this world throughout Europe for 1,000 years up to the Reformation. We're talking about a Roman Catholicism that is 2,000 years old. Her Roman Catholicism was not yet touched by the liberalism of the Second Vatican Council. and a church that was still able to impose dogma as unquestionable truth, despite the difficulties for the faithful in a scientific age to grasp revelation, which appears to be in conflict with scientific experience of this world. So this Catholicism, offering its faithful the catharsis of the great sacrament of divine absolution, which in the very Roman Catholic understanding of a never forgiving God is spoken by a man whose soul has received the seal of priestly ordination. It's a very Franciscan Catholicism, praising these almost effeminate virtues of weakness and poverty. Nonetheless, a Roman Catholicism that is rock hard with a violent tradition of excommunication of heretics from the community of the faithful, and if the papal see says so, also probably from paradise itself. From the Inquisition to the wars of religion, the Church's struggles for theological territory shows something of the imperialism of a monarchy, which technically the Vatican is. So what's the impact of Roman Catholicism on the values and on the behaviour of those I call Romanists? Again, whether a person is Catholic or a Protestant, if he or she is brought up in a nation with a predominantly Roman Catholic majority, he or she is led to adapt his or her values to that society and is essentially a Romanist. For example, the members of the French Reformed Church in France, which is a Calvinist church, do not realistically fall into the reformist category. As British Catholics, recusant or not, can't realistically be termed Romanists, as one might term, for example, a Spaniard. So what are the characteristics which distinguish Romanists? First of all, this ability on the basis of faith alone to accommodate otherworldly doctrine, which appears to be in scientific conflict in this world with daily life. Now, this requires a thought mechanism that I call elliptical thought. Elliptical thought helps to grasp doctrine by rejecting black and white conclusions about morality. Let me explain this a little more. The Romanist is not as enthusiastic about black and white absolutist morality as a Calvinist is. If Roman Catholic dogma must be taken on faith, then the world is complex and nothing is so simple. All moral reasoning is in shades of grey and not in black and white. Divine logic is not human logic, so the idea of absolute virtue or absolute vice is a blur. In any case, the good Lord forgives man's weakness and lack of understanding through his sacrament, so why worry? This is what I call elliptical reasoning. It never quite gets to the absolutist deadlock that paralyzes Calvinists about the so-called right thing to do. It's this reasoning that allows the vast majority of Catholics to practice contraception anyway, with little fear of moral consequences, despite the fact that the Vatican has proclaimed itself against contraception, or to the Church's optimistic forgiveness of the vilest criminals through its sacrament. It's thought without constraints that perfectly embraces mysticism and as a consequence even frees up the artistic mind. Very creative. The deductive thought process of Cartesianism, which the fathers of the Catholic Church are very famous for, brings rigor, the rigor of a dose of human logic to those complex shades of grey I've just spoken about, providing that unprovable dogma, such as the very existence of God, is accepted first. This is Descartes' point. Then the philosophical doctors of the Church have used logical tools to deduce all the rest. St. Augustine was a master of this. So the Cartesian tradition gives a classical Romanist a great taste for discussion and debate, providing it does not question dogma. Another point is outsourcing the responsibility for the state of his soul to a very powerful Mother Church. This leads to a lot of optimism about the afterlife, but possibly to a certain complacency too. Why worry about sin when divine forgiveness is available at the hands of a clerical aristocracy? This is indeed very far from the lonely journey of the Calvinist to election or to inevitable damnation. We have this strange Franciscan admiration of weakness and of poverty, where everywhere else it's considered to be disastrous and unacceptable. And the consequent guilt of having money, when salvation would appear to be gained through human misery. And this, of course, is a doctrine of original sin. And the denial among Romanists of the importance of time in this world. Why worry about time when compared with God's promise of eternity? So how do these historical, religious, and political movements affect behavior today? I consider they were relevant for my parents' behavior and values. But are they really that relevant today? Religion. Now, as I thought about these differences, two ideas struck me about my parents. The first was that their values were essentially shaped by these religious and political beliefs. That is, by their Catholicism or Protestantism, and by their inclination towards monarchy or republic. That they showed two contrasting extremes of European cultures. One a reformist monarchist from the north, and the other a Romanist republican from the south. The first of these ideas is that religious and political differences really do determine culture. I tried to find other influences at this same high level to define European behavior and values, but none had the same historical and sweeping hold on the Europeans as religion and political beliefs do. I found no other cultural factors that have killed so many innocent people down through the ages as religion and political beliefs have. Many people believe today that religion does not matter, yet many of these same people appear to find some kind of significant difference between Christians and Muslims. Why would that be if religion was not a component of culture? Many agnostic journalists write that they perceive a threat from Islam. Are they concerned about doctrinal, theological differences? Of course not. They're concerned about cultural ones. Those same journalists should take out their history books Some centuries ago, it was the turn of the crusading Christians to attack Islam. Islam is currently living its 13th century. In Christianity's 13th century, the Crusades were still a hot topic. Islam is a militant expansionist religion which is still getting over its 500 years of Ottoman domination. The latent antagonism between Christianity and Islam is 1,000 years old. It's about culture rather than about doctrine. It's unresolved, and it kills people. So I repeat my question, does religion matter in understanding culture? Of course it does. You could argue that Christianity is not Islam and that the difference between Protestants and Catholics are now really too minor to make a difference. I invite anyone who believes that to ask the question in Belfast. How would such a person